Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I don't know how long I could keep this up for, actually. The switchboard's still absolutely chocker with people, I think, entirely just looking for somewhere to explain how troubled they feel at the moment by the absence of certainty in their lives. Just glancing to see if anyone is prepared to ring in and say how much they're enjoying hearing from people. Nurses who've been here for 21 years, a German teacher who'd been here for 33 years. There was the Polish woman who's caring for her partner with dementia after paying tax since 2003. I just wonder where you all are. Why are you not ringing me to tell me how much you're loving this? How the salty taste of the liberal tears of these people describing having their lives thrown into complete mayhem and unnecessary confusion. Where are you guys? Come on. Put down the borrowed laptop, put down the second-hand laptop, shrug off the dirty bathrobe, pick up your phone, give me a ring. Tell me, it's lovely, it's great, I'm loving it, it's great. Give up your Photoshop hobbies, give me a call. You can, phone lines are open. I also want to introduce you to Ian Dunt, who you may have heard before on LBC. I've decided to invite him into the studio as evidence that in this corner of Britain, at least, we haven't had enough of experts. Ian is the author of, I'll get the title right, Brexit, What the Hell Happens Now? Everything you need to know about Britain's divorce from Europe. Now, Ian, you wrote it, came out about 6 months ago, did it?
Yeah, I think it came out October.
So it's out of date already?
I beg your pardon, no, it was a little bit later than that. No, actually, I think it's standing up pretty well so far, but then not much has changed. There was that point when she made her speech to the Tory party conference, and from that point until now, we haven't really learnt that much more about the UK's strategy or how it was going to approach it. So everything still seems okay there, and I think it will probably last for another 3 months or so. And then when the real negotiations take over, it will date pretty quickly.
And well, I mean, we've heard from Donald Tusk today about the stance, is that the right word to use? The sort of starting position that the European Union are going to use. Did any of that surprise you?
No, I mean, this is the funny part, that this is just the stuff that they've always said was the rules. I mean, when they say, well, look, you're not going to have any bilateral talks with EU member states during the negotiation, we knew that was going to be the case.
Well, you did. A significant number of people didn't, including a lot of prominent Leave campaigners.
Yeah, but the information was out there. The information was out there, it was credible, and anyone who was saying otherwise was either ignorant of the reality of it or was making it up. One of those people, of course, was David Davis, who's now the Brexit secretary, but during the campaign was saying the first thing that Britain would do, if it voted to leave, would be to go into bilateral trade negotiations with Germany. Which is illegal. Yeah, and yet he was either quickly educating himself or quickly starting to tell the truth about the situation that he was dealing with. So none of that is particularly surprising. Theresa May has spent months now saying we were going to have access to and operate within the single market. The phrase almost trips off the tongue.
Yes.
And today, very, very clearly, they just said, no, you won't. This is a thing. You're going to have a free trade agreement with us if we can sort it. But there'll be no one operating within the single market unless they abide by single market rules, which includes freedom of movement and all the things we've decided we no longer want.
So what is the best case scenario then, in your view?
The best case scenario, I think, now is we have a mutually agreeable divorce settlement on the budget and on EU citizens in Britain and vice versa. We then have a one-side sheet of A4 that basically says, look, this is the ultimate relationship that we want in terms of trade, frictionless trade.
What might be on that? Because, I mean, is there any prospect of having free movement of goods and money without free movement of people? You seem to suggest not.
They've already sort of said, look, you're going to have to take a hit. If you're not going to take free movement of people, it has to be worse than single market membership.
Right.
I think we definitely can get tariffs down to zero to where they are right now. Tariffs are pretty easy to sort out. We might also, if we work very hard, get mutual recognition of each other's customs arrangements, and that's the kind of thing that allows for trade to move very, very quickly over borders. When you listen to what Nissan say, regardless of any deal they might have done behind closed doors with the government, they say, look, we can handle about a 6-second delay in the supply chain.
Because they only have half a day's worth of supplies in their warehouse, so if the things aren't coming in every single day, they actually move into unproductivity, if that's even a word, within half a day.
Exactly. This is how global supply chains work.
Global supply chains. Haven't you heard we're a nation state?
Yes, no, I'm being very old-fashioned about these sort of things.
Really?
So this is how we lose those kind of manufacturing bases which, by the way, if they go off to the single market, instantly hurt exactly the communities which we're supposedly most concerned about, according to Theresa May now. That, I think, can be done as a future goal within the 2 years. It can't be negotiated within the 2 years, but we can say where we want to get to. And then the third part of the Article 50 puzzle is the transitional arrangements, which Theresa May told us would be an implementation phase. But it's quite clear now from what Europe is saying that there will be nothing to implement. That is instead a continuation of negotiation and an attempt by us to say, well, look, can we just keep our customs arrangements, our mutual recognition arrangements as they exist now during the further period after 2019 while we negotiate?
So the implementation phase or the transitional period is the continuing negotiations after the triggering has concluded.
Exactly. So the truth is,
we could be finished by 2019.
In terms of arranging the trade deal,
yeah,
I would say that the chances of that are basically zero.
It's very unpatriotic of you, Ian.
I know, yes, it's terrible, isn't it? I hear that realism is unpatriotic now.
Why is that basically?
So let's look at what Canada did, right? Canada took 5 years to do a deal with the EU, and that was mostly on goods. Now, goods are pretty easy. It's not very hard to decide, okay, we're going to knock down tariffs on bananas or whatever. It's much harder to come up with systems for services. So if you imagine,
which is about 3/4 of our
economy, exactly.
The European
we're
Union.
a services economy. It's what we are.
It's not about putting stuff on boats and shipping it to elsewhere in the world. It's the fruit of intellectual endeavour. It's financial
architecture, law, financial services, exactly.
Right.
And if if you're going to hire a Romanian solicitor to deal with your case, you're obviously going to want a much higher standard of sort of reliability than you might do if you're just buying bananas that come from another country. Services are hard, and it's hard to get people to accept it. That takes a long time. Now, we've already got equivalents in our setup, so there's some usefulness there. We don't need to get up to the same level as Europe. What they need to do is to believe that we will stay in a way that they still recognize in the years to come. And that is much, much harder. When the Americans had similar negotiations over really quite minor financial issues, those took absolutely years. So I haven't spoken to a single trade expert, that's for leavers and remainers, and most certainly for the trade experts overseas, from places like America, who are basically unaffected by this, but view it as a sort of interesting intellectual exercise. I haven't heard any of them say that they think it can be done in the 2 years that we've got.
And who will be doing it?
Who will be doing the negotiations?
From our side, because the EU has trade negotiators who've been operating for, 40-odd years. Who will be doing it for us?
This is the question. So we didn't, and I think even Nigel Farage admitted that we didn't have the negotiating sort of capacity right at the start. We have now been hiring. Many of them come from the private sector, and there's been some answers from the Brexit department of who they're taking on. Other times, and this is what concerns me, there have been civil servants that we've basically thrown a book at and said, scrub up on this quickly because we're going to need you. Now, that is a really dangerous situation for us to be in. If those guys go into a room, full credit to them, the civil service are incredibly intelligent. Most of the people I know, they're very capable. If they go into a room with Brussels trade experts, these are guys who've been doing this job their whole lives, who've just been blooded, not just by the deal with Canada, but also the deal which admittedly looks like it's going to fall apart with the Americans. They are going to eat our people alive. We need guys that are trade specialists, especially
you heard Tusk say that it's not going to be punitive because Brexit is punitive enough already. Can we not take that at face value?
No, it doesn't have to be punitive. But the thing is, trade deals are...
You're trying to get the best deal for your side of the negotiations. Exactly, it's not even any more complicated than that.
This is not the place for group hugs.
So
trade deals are where we represent our interests.
We go from partner to antagonist immediately. We go literally from being on the same side of the table as the people we're negotiating with to being the people they want to get one over on.
I think antagonist is too hard.
Good.
In that, you're ultimately a partner. Ultimately, trade is not a zero-sum game. It should be in everyone's benefit to reduce tariffs and have mutual recognition. Although, let's not pretend that politics isn't a role here. Your caller a moment ago said that Sun headline of your money or your lives, done the rounds in Europe. Guys that I spoke to in Europe really turned after the Amber Rudd speech at the Tory party conference, where she talked about foreign workers on boards and publishing foreign workers in companies and publishing the details. That was when the Europeans went from personal affront to, hang on a minute, we're battling the return of something really ugly, like the sort of nationalism of the 40s. And they started viewing it as more of an existential threat. Theresa May going off and holding hands with Donald Trump, who explicitly says, he wants to damage Europe, didn't help either. So there is that political element where they are very, very wary of what has happened to our political culture. But generally speaking, in trade deals, it should be more pragmatic. They shouldn't view you as an antagonist. And yet, Their bottom line is their nation's interests, not our interests, and we shouldn't expect it to be any other way.
Ian Dunt, it's an education. Do you feel up to answering questions if people want to read? Because I have to say that your book is encyclopedic in its scope, but so I wasn't quite sure. I've heard you on LBC, but you, if anything, even more fluent in person. So people. I'll keep a couple of phone lines free if you want to ask him something about the sort of finer detail of some of these issues, both the ones that are established and the ones that are still emerging. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. It's not like an agony uncle service, but it is the difference, if you like, between... Well, to use your example, Ian, between the man who is now the Secretary of State for Brexit saying that we were going to do something that is demonstrably and definitively illegal. That's why you need a mind like Ian's, or at least a knowledge base like Ian's, to work out what is feasible, what isn't feasible. So give him a ring and ask. It's going to be hard to get through because so many people are still waiting to talk to me about their personal situations, but that's my problem. I'll worry about that. Let's just have a quick word before the travel news with Raz, who is in, appropriately enough, Frankfurt. Raz, if you're still there, mate, you've been on hold for a long time. What was it you wanted to say?
Yeah, hi.
If you can remember.
Long time. Well, I did. Well, I'm on my lunch break anyway, so that's fine. The thing is, it's like I work, obviously, for a multinational company which operates across the EU, supplying medical supplies and everything like that. And the thing is, with regards to the uncertainty of what's going to happen is like I'm actually feeling. I don't want to sound like cocky or anything like that, but I'm actually feeling sorry for the guys back in the UK because the company, the way it operates is because there's such a large presence across the EU. I'm actually thinking that hang on a minute, what if the company board decides to up sticks from the UK and go inland towards the EU because.
So the bulk of the business is done in continental Europe, but the HQ is in Britain, and you're wondering what's the point of having the HQ in Britain post-Brexit if all the business is still being done on the continent?
Pretty much, yeah.
So when you say you don't want to sound cocky, that's because you're based in Frankfurt. You're not on the road when you're there.
Yeah. I'm based in. I literally moved out here just before the Brexit vote, and so that's why I feel like a bit lucky about it, but I don't want to feel that way.
No, so what you're doing is telling me you're worried about your colleagues who are still based in the UK.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite compassionate and empathetic of you, Raz. Didn't you get the memo?
Yeah, sorry.
It's 2017, man.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, my friends actually joke about it, like, oh, you Brexited from Brexit, you whatever and all that, or they call it Rexit because Raz and everything. So, but no, it's this is the complexity that you kind of start asking yourself questions about.
And also you give us a positive side of uncertainty, albeit for you rather than for the people still in Britain. Briefly, before I go to the travel and after the travel, I'll ask Ian about the sort of commercial implications of a lot of this for companies like yours. What's the tone of the conversation that you have with German people when the subject comes up?
Obviously when Article 50 got actually formally triggered the other day, I was with my colleagues here in the office, and they're like saying, look, the whole point of the EU was that Britain was supposed to be the sort of figurehead and leadership point, sort of like mediator between France and Germany.
Yes.
And the thing is, it's like Germany don't want to be, well, generally, Germany don't want to be in that role, because then otherwise it will be seen as the unofficial, Fourth Reich.
Yes, of course, the leaders.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, it's like, it's like, okay, here's the responsibility. Britain kind of runs Europe in a sort of loose way, but it's just like, well, the leader kind of just up sticks and went, and it's like, okay, what are we supposed to do? It's like it's.
Do they understand why Britain has done it? Do they understand the sort of tides that have brought us to this?
Yeah, they know exactly what's happened, and they feel like, hang on, why didn't anyone tell the truth? Right, and not only that, I also attended the.
I'm late for the travel. Give me in a sentence, Raz.
Sorry. Yeah, basically, obviously, because of all this, I managed to educate myself more on what the EU exactly does, and I was like, hang on a minute. We should have all been told this before
Didn't sell any papers, mate. Didn't butter any parsnips. Raz, thank you. I love when I say hurry up and you say basically obviously. First 2 words. It's my fault, isn't it? The more pressure I put on people to hurry up, the more flustered. But you weren't flustered. You were brilliant. It's 12:18. Listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined by Ian Dunt, whose book Brexit, What the Hell Happens Now, provides a pretty definitive account of just how much confusion and ignorance has surrounded the entire debate. You touched on one a moment ago, which was the imbalance between commodities and services. About 3/4 of our economy is service-based, certainly our exports to the European Union. They're not things that you can put in containers. They're not things you can put on boats. We spent the last 20 years effectively bemoaning the collapse of British industry, and then the referendum campaign started, and apparently we've got all these secret industries that are churning out loads and loads of stuff that they're poised to sell to other countries the minute we leave the European Union. But Raz, before the travel in, was actually in the business of flogging stuff in Europe, in continental Europe, based in Frankfurt, but for a British-based company. What do you think is going to change in
he
those
was in pharmaceuticals, if I remember correctly, which
medical supplies, yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting because the European Medical Agency was in London, and there was an awful lot of drugs companies, pharmaceutical companies, and medical supply companies that would come to London specifically to be near the regulator. Not all of them, but some. Now it's going to move somewhere else. We imagine probably France or Germany. We're not sure, and some of those companies will go with it. But we're going to end up in a very weird position because either we will keep exactly the same regulatory standards as they have in Europe.
Yeah.
Or we're going to start changing them. Now, if we keep them exactly the same as they're in Europe, and that would basically mean just recognizing everything the European Medicines Agency does, regardless of the fact that we're not in it now, then most drugs companies would still sell their stuff here. They would still want to be based here. If we start changing it, and that means anything, I mean, we could start changing, let's say, something quite commendable, like raising the standards for animal welfare in the testing of drugs. As soon as our standards go higher than they are in Europe, we suddenly are not the same. We're not sort of a decent market for a product to go into. A drugs company would say, look, we've got a huge American market, we've got a huge European market, and now here's a smaller British market that we cannot sell into. So we would suddenly come about 5 years later onto the market. That would be quite damaging, and it would mean that lots of these sort of companies would start saying, exactly as you were alluding to earlier, well, we might move the HQ because Britain is no longer a useful beachhead to the whole of Europe.
And what could stop that from happening? Would be just to carry on, not because when you hear about we're going to remove regulation, we're going to remove red tape, when you dig into that, what it often means is we're not going to let people wash chickens in chlorine, and we're not going to let them test their drugs on pandas.
Yeah, exactly. But that's exactly what we'll do is we'll just keep everything exactly the same. We will basically say whatever the European Medical Agency says, that is what we will do. So all we will have done is lost our ability to have an input into that discussion, and yet it would keep us open commercially to more drugs coming in here.
I'm going to take a call from Lane, who's in Seaham in County Durham. Lane, I know you don't want to talk to me. Ask Ian Dunt whatever you please.
Yeah, I wonder what your take is on Scotland and the whole devolution, like the second Indy ref thing. And whether, if they left at the wrong time, could it sort of cancel out our terms regarding EU?
How big a deal is it in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of the sort of grand project, the agitations north of the border?
I think it offers Europe an extremely crucial bit of leverage, which is as soon as Britain isn't doing something that it wants in negotiation, they can just say, well, you know what, we're just going to go have a chummy press conference with Nicola Sturgeon, assuring her that she'll be able to get in very, very quickly. My guess, though, is that Sturgeon doesn't really intend to hold that referendum before March 2019 when we leave. My guess is that she has set this up as a trap. I think a really obvious trap. I mean, she might as well have put flashing lights on it and sold tickets.
Well, because it just weaponises Theresa May's refusal to have the second referendum.
Exactly. She gets
away.
2 years of Theresa May refusing to hold the referendum.
Yeah.
And yet, crucially, she's not actually refusing to hold it. She's refusing to hold it now.
Yeah.
So first of all, Theresa May does exactly what Sturgeon wants and provides the theatre of refusal. And then she offers a channel for people to express their irritation at that in a referendum. That suggests to me that the referendum can be won. Now, it wouldn't be, I don't think, following that, because this would be post-Brexit, about Scotland going right back into the EU. It looks, if you look at what the SNP are putting out there, and they're a bit nervous about this, but the signs are clearly there, that they would want to skip the EU and therefore skip the requirements of joining the euro, of joining Schengen, and a potential Spanish veto, and actually go and join the European Economic Area with Norway and Switzerland and a few others. That gets them back into the single market. It avoids most of the difficulties they found otherwise in the project, and would probably be a very good economic exercise in being able to say to voters, look, these companies are leaving Britain because it's left the single market. We can welcome them all back. And even though that is not a perfect economic argument, it may well be compelling enough for the referendum to succeed.
I mean, I get accused of dealing in doom and gloom myself, but I think, like you, it's just facts that are uncomfortable. I mean, is there anything that sort of represents a positive possible future that you can discern at the moment?
I think that there were options. I don't think that we've taken them. I thought after the referendum, joining the European Free Trade Association, which we originally set up, and through that the EEA with Norway and Switzerland, a country of our size going into that would have meant that we would have sort of created a de facto two-speed Europe. You know, we would have been hanging back. Other countries could have solidified more. And I think you could have eventually found a pretty good scenario there. We chose not to do it. You could potentially
because
say...
Theresa May's enthralled to the
I would say to the UKIP wing of the Tory party and of the press.
Mail, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Even though, I mean, I think when you look at that tight result, when you look at the fact that Scotland and Northern Ireland didn't vote that way, that seemed to me a very democratically credible way of proceeding, but she chose not to go there. You could say that we're going to tilt our economy away from financial services. We'll probably lose about 10 to 15%, I would suggest, of city capacity. Not that much, because, you know, basically nobody wants to live in Frankfurt. So, you know, there's a limitation.
No offence to Raz, who rang in a moment.
Oh, so, yeah, I beg your pardon, Raz, yeah. And, you know, there's a limitation on school places, and there's a limitation on how many jobs there are on offer in Paris, say, in financial services. So there's a limit to how far it will go, but we'll move some of our capacity off. And that might be a good thing. You know, when you look at something like HSBC in Britain, I mean, that's about 2 trillion of liabilities if that thing goes wrong. And all of that is on the British taxpayer. However, even there, my thing is, if we want to decide to re-nose our economy away from financial services, that should be something that we are doing specifically as part of a coordinated plan. That should not be the repercussion of some other action which we haven't thought through properly. So even where there may be, in some areas, something good from it, it's happening as a repercussion, and therefore we're not in control of it.
Okay. I would like you to ask Ian more questions. I'm not going to run out, but I appreciate that the ones that occur to me may not be the ones that occur to you. If you want to do that, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm joined by Ian Dunt, the journalist and author of Brexit, What the Hell Happens Next? And that's kind of the umbrella under which all of your questions could be filed. Your questions for him, he's an expert. There's one corner of the country where they're still very welcome. So if you want to ask him, in terms of what the hell happens next, although maybe you could be, don't start ringing me and coming on air and saying, hello, I'd like to ask Ian, what the hell happens next? I want a slightly more specific line of inquiry than that one. Let me read you a text here. It's from Patrick in Forest Gate, who's I've got no reason to suggest that any tongue is in cheek here. He's written, "Hi James, I finished Ian's book on the 1st of January. Since then, we've left our jobs. Our house sale completes today. We've converted all our savings into euros and we move to Ireland next week. TTFN, Patrick in Forest Gate." How does that make you feel?
Sorry, Patrick.
Is that a rational response?
That £6 spending decision.
Is that a rational response to what he's read?
It seems quite hasty. You don't necessarily need to sell the house as soon as you read the book, but like the idea should be really, I don't really care which side of the debate you're on. And one of the things I find so depressing about this is that those who assume, take on the mantle of Brexit rather than just having voted for it, keep on trying to avoid the details of what it entails. And I would suggest, like, even if you believe in Brexit, you'd be better off understanding the obstacles so you can address them, rather than getting lost in this sort of chest-beating, patriotic sing-song that we've developed over the last 9 months.
And just by way of balance, Linda's been in touch to say that I definitely won't be buying the book of the person you're talking to now. That's from Linda. I'm blessed with the ability to scroll through previous texts, and Linda's she's not suffering from textual diarrhea or anything like that, but 3 days ago she texted me to say, I voted leave because I wanted there to be a lot less immigration. So when we get Brexit, if there is not a lot less immigration, I will be very disappointed. That's from Linda in Wigan, who isn't going to buy your book, so we can answer her question for free. Is there going to be a lot less immigration?
It doesn't look like it. So you look at what David Davis is saying recently, and he's basically saying, look, we're going to keep the levels about where they are right now. Even people like Liam Fox are saying it. Even ministers who were incredibly anti-immigration before will go and talk to businesses and find out that actually the businesses require immigration and that it would be a very bad idea for us to suddenly, close the tap. The only person who, as I understand it, really believes in the tens of thousands promise is Theresa May.
Really?
And who apparently really does believe in it. There are these stories that come that, these guys come in and they go, look, actually this would be very damaging to the economy. We've seen the Bank of England, we've seen the OBR, the assessments of the damage that would do and the amount you need to raise taxes and reduce public spending if you really cut immigration have been made clear to her, and she either doesn't believe it or she doesn't care. And the understanding is that she genuinely believes in stuff, but nobody else around the cabinet table really does. And what I think is quite troubling.
So Theresa May might be the one that is prepared to cut off the proverbial nose to...
Well, yeah, this is the thing, is being prepared to do it and actually doing it.
Fits with her Home Office performance, partly.
It does fit with the Home Office performance, and yet... The last immigration figures, remember, the people coming from outside the EU were at about roughly the same number as people coming from within the EU. So those we could stop, we still weren't doing, because there is still a part of this country that understands that we don't want to make ourselves poorer. And when we look at the polling, and I know polling is not very trusted at the moment, yes, you find that people are very, very wary of immigration. But what you also find is that they're not willing to lose a single pound out of their pocket in order to reduce it. The British people are pragmatic, and they ultimately care more about the economy than they do about immigration. What we've failed to do, I think, is to show people demonstrably why they themselves will be poorer if we suddenly start to crack down on immigration in a substantial way.
But that's Project Fear.
Well, exactly, yes. I mean, how appalling of me to have dressed up in this Dracula cloak and start saying it.
And is that... you alluded to this off-air, but is that the way we make sense of Theresa May's otherwise quite odd refusal to separate foreign students from the overall immigration figures? Because if she is obsessed with the numerical reduction, then that is a very damaging thing to happen to the country, but it would actually contribute to the numerical diminishment.
Exactly. It's really easy to cut down on foreign students.
Even though that damages everything about the country.
It damages everything. I mean, these are guys, they come across, they've usually got a lot of money because they can afford to be foreign students in the first place. They're usually very well educated. If you give them visas that let them work here for the next couple of years afterwards, they tend to set up businesses in the UK. Even when they don't, they go off, they have very warm memories of the UK. So this type of person who's likely to create employment, to create profit, tends to associate warm sentiments with the country. And these are the last people you want to lose. I mean, I can't think of an immigrant, a group that you would less want to lose than international students. And yet Theresa May, we think, keeps them in those figures despite almost everyone demanding from right and left demanding she remove them, because she can hammer down those numbers and she's intent on hammering down those numbers no matter the repercussion.
Which makes a mockery of the qualitative versus quantitative argument that some employ with regard to immigration.
It makes a mockery of anything apart from the most base level of political objective, which is just to say...
Numbers.
Yeah, and remember, that number came because David Cameron sort of said it by mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, the tens of thousands is the most arbitrary, mistaken level that we could have set this, and yet now we have the whole function of government dedicated towards achieving it for absolutely no reason whatsoever that I can discern.
So if Linda in Wigan's wish comes true, she'll be demonstrably worse off, and if it doesn't come true, she'll be furious.
Yeah, so it's not going to work out very well for her either way.
Or anybody, actually.
No, this is the trouble, that, even if you think you're in a profession where you think that your wages are being reduced by immigration, which, by the way, there's really very little to indicate that happens much outside of maybe hospitality, then you are going to face the following problem. If we reduce immigration, we're going to see less money coming into the exchequer. If there's less money coming into the exchequer, either your taxes are going to have to rise or there are going to have to be cuts to public services. But basically, the name of the game is austerity. And cutting immigration makes austerity worse, makes it last longer.
And people have voted for it because the very powerful rhetoric of people coming over here and taking advantage of our welfare state got so much traction and went so unchallenged by reality, by facts.
Yeah, it was incredible, wasn't it? That one day changed to they're coming over here and they're reducing wages or taking your jobs. Yeah. Now, both of those things
literally
can't be true.
Overnight. It's Schrodinger's immigrant.
Right, it was amazing. So whatever they do, they cannot win. Immigrants have to be a force for bad. And after a while, you have to ask yourself, look, if the justifications change this quickly, maybe there is a sentiment behind them that is just opposed to diversity and to difference and to foreigners and from people outside of the village coming in.
But if anybody rings me to explain that is now how they are feeling, then it's me that is scaremongering and being divisive, just so that you understand how this medium works. Patrick's been back in touch from Forest Gate. You can't see this from where you're sitting. He sent me a photograph of his removal van. Irish removals across Ireland and the UK. On your head be it, Ian Dunt. Ian, another Ian. This one's in Nunhead. What would you like to ask my guest, Ian?
Hello. I just wanted to ask two quick questions. So first of all, you've obviously mentioned that we mostly a service industry, and I'm going to be quite selfish here and just ask what you think the impact on the media industry, broadly speaking, would be, just because I know that there's quite a lot of integration with Europe, but because it's more global, it might be the one exception that Brexiteers sort of mentioned where it is global, but I'm not so sure on the financials of that. And also, speaking as a renter, what do you think house prices will be like after Brexit? Simply because on the one hand, I'm thinking, oh, it'll be great. It'll make renting cheaper, but if that ever happens, I probably will be unemployed. But then on the other hand, maybe it will increase house prices because suddenly we literally will become the world's biggest safety deposit box. So I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's interesting. The house prices have responded a bit cautiously so far, and that...
There's not a lot of movement, is there? There's not a lot of transactions.
But I think if it does go anywhere, it will be going downwards. I can't imagine this leading to a rise in house prices because of Brexit anyway. They may rise for other factors. But it's too early, really, for us to... We haven't seen any significant movement, and it's not clear which direction that'll go. In terms of the media, I mean, a lot of this stuff comes down to the digital single market, which is still being negotiated in Europe. I mean, I have to say, you know, when Theresa May goes over to countries like India and starts talking about free trade agreements, lots of sort of creative types get very nervous because economies like that don't really pay much respect to intellectual property.
No.
And they would much rather throw in their lot with a digital single market in Europe, which has very, very high standards for that sort of thing, rather than put it into an Indian free trade agreement. So that would be the crucial area right there, whether we stay in the digital single market, which we could do, it's possible that would happen, or what we're prepared to trade away and how desperate we are when we go into those negotiating rooms in places like New Delhi and Beijing.
So the digital single market, for the uninitiated, would be loosely described as free movement of data?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah, and intellectual property, yes. Really, and would set very high standards there. There's also some European rules.
So if I write some code, it is protected by law in that territory. And everyone within that territory would obey that law, would observe that law. If you do a deal with a country that has less high standards, they might rip it off and start flogging their own version.
That's exactly right. Okay. And actually, this is the sort of next stage of the single market where we see the same thing with patents, which is really where there's a unified patent court that Europe is setting up. So instead of having different patents in different countries, as we've had so far, there will be one patent across all of Europe. Now, Britain is a real leader in patents, incredibly so. And its loss from that system would be felt very sharply by the Europeans. We have put in years of work, not least by David Cameron, trying to get the patent court to come to London, where it was.
Right.
And it looks like we're still signed up to this, by the way, despite everything, even though there's a link between that court and the European Court of Justice, which Theresa May, I think a rather foolhardy way and a really preemptory way, said she was going to pull us out of. So now we have a policy where we are sort of leaving the European Court of Justice, although there'll still be this umbilical cord to the patent court.
Right.
But we don't want to get out of the patent system because it stands to benefit Britain in a very large degree.
So I mean, the broad brushstrokes are troubling enough, but the finer detail is well, it's positively Kafkaesque at the moment. I'm going to head towards the travel news. We've got another 15 minutes for you to put your questions to Ian Dunt. 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need. Talking about the technology and the data, did you see the story about video games companies? 40% of them already thinking of moving
I thought it was even higher than that, yeah. And that's one of our major success areas. And absolutely, you know, this is something that we're going to see in several industries. Partly that's uncertainty, which could have been cleared up sort of a little bit earlier. But partly it's also that many companies are here because it means that they can transmit stuff across borders without having to worry about it. And as soon as they do need to worry about it, it doesn't make any sense for them to stay here anymore.
It's 12:46. I should tell you that the MP Wes Streeting has just written to the Prime Minister regarding the relationship between Uber and Number 10, historically. I know a lot of people listening for fairly obvious reasons. I should say hello. Whoever was driving the taxi up the A4 yesterday and tooted me as I walked past with my little girl. Thank you, madam. That made our day. Well, it made my day. She's gloriously unimpressed by such things. But Cabby's listening. Go to my Twitter account, or indeed Wes Streeting's Twitter account. Have a look at that letter. I've got a feeling that story might not go away. Ian Dunt is still with me. Let's have a quick word with Mark, who's in Newark. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hello, James and Ian. I don't know about the economic perspective, and to be fair, a lot of things that Ian's been talking about, you know, ring a bell. But what my argument is, I voted to leave. But the reason I voted to leave was there were a couple of things in the press that happened just before, and there was a girl, and a poor girl, was murdered in Richmond in London. And the guy that had the person they suspected had done it was a Latvian national, and they tried to go to Latvia to actually sort of like get a police hunt because they thought he'd gone back home. When they went back to Latvia, the police couldn't get a manhunt because there were so few on numbers. And a few days after that, in the press, there was another argument about Latvia, or the Tallinn University, and they couldn't fill their student quota because a lot of the bright and the good in their country, they
So just because I don't want to run out of time, you voted to leave because you're worried that too much talent was moving out of Eastern European countries and coming here.
Yeah, and I think that the...
But it'll just go to Germany and France, won't it, now?
Pardon?
It'll just go to Germany and France now.
Well, yeah, but my point is, James, that when the EU was set up, it was there's another thing that they keep... I hate the belligerence of some of these Brexiters. It really annoys me, the willful ignorance and proud of it attitude. I think it's shocking.
Yes.
My argument is that when it was first set up, one of the things, for example, they keep saying is the EU keeps saying about it being a force for peace within Europe. Well, it was a force for peace within Europe because it was set up where Britain, Germany and France would have so many economic ties that they wouldn't want to fight.
Did you know, I don't know if you heard the caller in Frankfurt earlier, and actually, Mark, I need more people like you to ring in, sort of, if you will, thoughtful, intelligent, Leave voters rather than the ones you describe as being the sort of belligerent Brexiters. Unfortunately, I think it's a self-selecting sample sometimes. But had you heard that argument before that we heard from Frankfurt of Raz's German colleagues saying that they thought Britain was like the referee in Franco-German?
Yes,
I'd never heard that before today.
No, I haven't either. But the point I'm trying to make is that this when they say, when people like Tusk come on the TV and on radio and say things like, for example, it's kept Europe at peace for 70 years. Well, that's true, but it was set up because of the economic ties. And my point is that Europe, as the EEC, economic ties is a great thing, but I don't believe that we should have Eastern Europe. I don't believe in this idea of going towards federalism and having. I think the free movement thing is complete folly when it means the countries of the East lose their...
Well, let's have a look at that. I mean, it's quite a powerful argument. I think 25% of Lithuanian graduate level educated young people have quit the country. And I believe, Mark, I think that was a defining factor in his vote. What's the answer to that? I mean, it depends on which group you're concerned about. If we're concerned about the home countries, and it's true that there's places you go to in Eastern Europe where there's villages, that have been cleared out of all young people, I would say that they still do well out of this because of remittance payments, which is the money that people send back when they come to work in a richer economy like, the UK or Germany or France. And that tends to go towards the training up of the younger generation back at home. They go to university and they start creating more businesses at home. Now, it might not be that on that day it looks that way, and these processes, they take a while, they take a time to work. But nevertheless, it tends to work out better for people back at home. And over here, it tends to work out very well for us as well. Because not only do we deal with the demographic problem, and which sort of goes a bit like this, by the way, which is that, at the beginning of your life, you cost the state money, and at the end of your life, you cost the state money. At the beginning through education and hospitals, and at the end through pensions and hospitals again. And in between, you pay your way.
In between, you pay your way when you're working age. Now, we have too many old people in this country. We have a major demographic problem. And immigration...
That's an economic observation, by the way, not a sort of...
Not a social one.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. Let's make that clear.
Economically, we have too many old people and not enough young people. One of the solutions to deal with this, and it is not the only solution, and it does not solve it entirely, it just buys us time, is to bring more people of working age over to be paying money into the Treasury. And what we overwhelmingly find is that immigrants pay in more than they take out, unlike British citizens, and that European Union immigrants pay in more than average immigrants. They are very, very useful, and they give us time to train up our local economy. So I think from freedom of movement that both sides have won. The home countries win, and that Britain has done very, very well out of it indeed. But nevertheless, it's impossible to deny the fact that it's become incredibly politically unpopular.
Indeed. Although it's a valid point, of course, about the gaps that are left behind. We're going to run out of time. You're going to have to come back, Ian Dunt. Incorrigible FCA, who's one of my most assiduous correspondents, has been using judicious use of radar for 20 minutes, but he can't get on. He's tweeted his question. Is there any way that you can envision it being stopped? Is there any way you can see a halt being called?
Yeah. And, I think it's amazing how sternly they try to knock down any suggestion that can happen. And we saw a leak from the European Parliament earlier this week where they explicitly said it is revocable. There is a court case now taking place in Ireland where they're going to try and finalise that, but the majority of legal opinion is that this can be reversed
if we want to reverse it. Now, I don't think at the moment there's appetite for that. And yet, if you imagine where the debate was 6 months ago and where it is now, back in the day it was all unicorns and gold at the end of every rainbow. Now, the entirety of the Brexit debate is how do we minimise damage? We're starting to see a reduction in economic confidence. I don't think it's impossible there could be a push, a public push, in order to stop this sometime over the next 18 months.
It depends what happens next, because you've gone from the unicorn promise to, I never thought I was going to get a unicorn. I knew all along I was going to be worse off, but I think that 20 years from now, my grandchildren might be better. So that pretense, that kind of doubling down on the delusion, it's a question of whether or not that breaks or whether or not that gets accelerated.
And that's definitely there. And as you're sort of saying, there's a sort of self-selecting group of very, very sort of noisy Brexiters, just like there is very, very noisy minority of Remainers. Yes. But I think most people in this country are pragmatic. They're not willing for these decisions to cost them in their pocket. And over the next few months, we will see that devaluation of sterling start to hit not just our personal wallets when we buy something from overseas, but also in our public services. The NHS buys half of its drugs overseas. It buys its MRI scanners overseas, and it's going to be paying more at a moment of already existing crisis, and that could change the political debate.
And yet, will that information reach people in a fair and honest way?
So my hunch is, as things go badly wrong, most of the Brexit press and politicians will blame immigrants and European officials trying to punish us, and it's up to everyone.
And Lily
else. Lily Allen and Gary Lineker, obviously, who's a monster.
Absolutely.
Yes. And it's up to the rest of us to say, well, actually, no, this is about evidence, this is about causation, this follows from the actions that you have taken, and you are responsible for it.
Because that went well. Ian Dunt, Brexit, what the hell happens next is in all good bookshops and actually most rubbish ones as well. That's it from me for another week. We'll do it all again on Monday morning from 10. Have a cracking weekend, keep your family close, and spare a thought for those who can't be confident that they're going to be able to.